Rating analysts say that the reputation of the whole emirate has been damaged by this episode, and that might make it harder for Dubai companies to raise debt abroad in the future. This particularly threatens local property developers, most of which are already suffering from falls in property prices and demand. Many of them have seen potential lines of credit, for example from the USA, suddenly being withdrawn.
Well, over recent years, the UK has been one of the biggest sources of investment into Dubai. So for further reaction to the news, I'm joined by two London-based financiers, Norval Loftus, here, head of Islamic debt at the Matrix Group, and also Emad Mostaque, who is Middle East equity fund manager at Pictet Asset Management. Welcome both of you to the programme. Let me start first of all with you, Norval, because you specialise in debt, bonds and so on. What do you make of the restructuring that's on the table and the fact, of course, that Dubai, the state, is not going to step in and guarantee this debt?
Well, the idea that the state separated themselves, was a major shock last week.
From a company that it owns?
Yeah, from a market point of view, yes, it definitely took the market by surprise. Now, over the last 2 days, they've done actually quite a good job in terms of starting to fill in the information gaps to provide a clearer picture about how the restructuring is going to take place. We don't have anything specific, but we do know that that there is a mandate that's been issued, and that there is ongoing negotiations. There's going to be an emphasis on timely information. We have the basics for a restructuring story that will sort of have the potential to satisfy the market.
Let's talk more about that in a second. Meanwhile, if I can, I'd like to come to you, please, Emad, and ask about the effect on the region. The fact that Dubai was not prepared to come in and back up these debts, and indeed Abu Dhabi appeared to be turning its back, the oil-rich Abu Dhabi appeared to be turning its back on Dubai. Is that liable to have a ripple effect throughout the region in terms of people thinking, well, actually, what are the rules of the game here?
Well, I mean, in the short term, yes, it will have an impact on the region. As we saw today, Dubai fell 7.2%, but the Egyptian market fell 8%, despite having almost no relation to Dubai sovereign issues. In the medium term, actually, if you look at it, the disaggregation of the state from the sovereign in Dubai's case is a positive thing, because it's reduced the overall debt of Dubai. And from last week's $5 billion bond issuance, you've actually seen increasing support for the Dubai sovereign.
Right, so your point is that if you're investing in Dubai as a country, as a sovereign, it's quite good news because it's distanced itself from the problem.
Yeah, so it's basically said, if you've taken out the loans, I mean, it's treating it in a free market manner as opposed to elsewhere in the world where you've seen, for example, in the US, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac bailouts, and then obviously the benefits shift from one to the other. If you look at the other states in the Gulf, however, I don't think this paradigm will follow, because ultimately, whereas Dubai is resource poor, reserves poor, Abu Dhabi, Qatar, Saudi Arabia have huge hydrocarbon reserves, have huge amounts of savings. Abu Dhabi, $80 million a day of profit from this oil production.
But that's all very well, isn't it, Norval? But the truth is that people invested surely in Dubai because they thought that the neighbouring oil was going to come in handy. Oil price is very high. That if you looked at the way Dubai was being built, it was very difficult to find individual commercial rationale for each individual project. The idea was build it and they will come.
Right. And in fact, we'd seen a heavy emphasis on the type of Abu Dhabi support for Dubai activities in the months headed into the announcement last week. So it was not only just a perception in the market, it was being borne out in the financings and the type of issuances that were being done in the region. So yeah, that was definitely the case.
Do you think, though, the lesson is that fine, invest in the state in the Middle East? After all, as we've identified, there's plenty of oil there. The oil price is very high, but be very cautious about the assets outside the state that you invest in. Is that the message?
Well, I mean, investors should always be cautious about the individual viability of any assets. Just because support is implicit, it doesn't mean you can rely on it. I mean, I think the lesson here is just pick your investments very carefully. There's plenty of profitable companies in the Middle East. I mean, with no taxation, state support in terms of low feedstock prices and the like, it's not that difficult for these companies to make money. And given current levels and $2.5 trillion of infrastructure spending over the next 10, 15 years, there's plenty of opportunity there.
We've got to bear in mind also this is a fairly immature market in terms of equities, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's only opened up to foreign investment in the last 3 years. I would estimate foreign investment probably 1.5% to 2% in these markets. Take Turkey 70%, somewhere like South Africa 40%. This has to move. These markets have to mature. And as it goes by, I mean, you'll see incremental foreign money naturally being attracted to these markets. So investors have to be educated.
You've started saying that there are details emerging of how this restructuring is going to work. Can they pull it off? Because a lot of people need to buy into any restructuring in order for it to work.
Absolutely, they can pull it off. I think, in my opinion, they're in the process of pulling off. We don't have the exact details at this stage, but I think without a doubt they're working very diligently at this stage to try to come to a rational conclusion for the investment community. What an opportunity to grow up, frankly. You know, from a point of view where there hadn't been a particularly well-handled announcement to the idea now that we have the pieces in place to create a successful restructuring. And frankly, now we're left to find out the exact details of how things are going to be handled. But an important lesson for the market is don't sort of draw the most negative possible conclusions, worst case scenario conclusions, on the basis of a lack of information.
Would you briefly agree with that?
I would, definitely. I mean, there's a panic sell-off now, but medium term, long term, it's fine.
Emad Mostaque and Norval Loftus, thank you very much indeed for joining us here in the studio. To you both. President Obama has issued new orders specifying how many more troops he will send to Afghanistan. The White House said